I'm Carl, your friendly CyberBroker leftover, community manager, and one of the co-hosts for tonight.
I'm Merk, your co-host for tonight, TJ and fellow GGen.
I am Mags. I'm a CBU enthusiast, a productive procrastinator, and a writer's room participant.
I am Requiem's Drifter representative, and I am also in the writer's room.
Welcome. So excited to have more people from the writer's room. This is the 7th in a series of lore listening parties, an opportunity for those that are new to learn more about the lore or storyline, and that's the foundation of CyberBrokers. For the rest, it's an opportunity to catch up, re-enjoy the richness of the lore chapters. For each event, we'll have special guest hosts who will provide commentary, background, or their own personal experiences on the chapters we're covering. After the chapter's done, we'll switch into community mode, bring up members of the audience who would like to ask questions or share their own personal thoughts. You can also do that in CB General and Discord if you're not comfortable coming up and speaking live. At the very end, there'll be some quick announcements and then instructions on how to get entered into the giveaway. You can find recordings of these on Twitter for a couple weeks and permanently now on the new CyberBrokers YouTube channel. Tonight, we're going back to Chapter 7. The first part was released on June 19th before quest number 3. And the second part was released on June 22nd after the quest was completed. This is the chapter quest where the Team Ken versus Zinc debate really picked up. Our special guests tonight are from the writer's room. Can you tell us just a little more about your experiences in the writer's room, and maybe Mags first, since this is your first time here?
Sure. Yeah, for me, it's kind of intimidating. I grew up kind of getting lost in the worlds of very great detailed story weavers, and I sincerely appreciate Douglas Adams, Patrick Rothfuss, Neil Gaiman, a bunch of different really wonderful, very talented authors, and I think I became involved with the writers' room because I wanted to be a part of that experience of brainstorming on that level of brilliance and world building. And it's intimidating and it's a responsibility because you have such respect for Josie and for all of the team that came together, and it's challenging and beautiful, and it takes a good deal of bravery and conviction to try to express your passion for all the different ways that this world can be shaped. And especially if you have imposter syndrome like me, it's just hard to speak up sometimes when all you hear is why are you putting your input on this? But I love it. It's so fun.
You're the first person who didn't mention the Blood Pact.
Apparently I wasn't part of it. I don't know.
Requiem, how about you?
The Blood Pact is implied at this point. It's like Prince or North Dakota.
Anything you want to add about the writer's room, Nick?
No, she hit it pretty damn on the nose. There's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of ideas floating around. And yeah, sometimes you're afraid if maybe you should input on this, maybe you shouldn't. It's picking your battles, and picking your battles is a pain in the rear. Let's put it like that sometimes. But overall, I'd say it's been a good experience. Still intimidating even today, though.
I can imagine, given all the bombshells that keep getting thrown, trying to work them out ahead of time must have a lot of interesting choices and opinions of the various people in the writer's room. How do ties get broken in the writer's room?
Oh, you meant like a voting tie. Oh, that makes so much more sense. It took me a sec. Forgive me. I can't say we've ever really had a tie. At least not one that's ever turned into a deadlock.
It's really interesting. Honestly, everybody will put their 2 cents in on different aspects of a subject, and sometimes it'll be a conversation that's been happening over the course of a few months. But eventually everybody comes around to, I think we all respect each other's points of view, even if it's not expressed right at the time. It's something that comes up maybe a little bit later on, but it seems like there's a lot we do with each other's input that just helps create a really wonderful outcome.
That's awesome to hear. And I'm probably sure it works a lot better for everyone in there. I want to switch to the chapter a little bit. So in the last chapter, we found Spice by herself after the protests at the Merkle Tree went sideways. She owned a gambler and found Zinc, her normal badass self. They were in the middle of a moment, Zinc and her, and poof, something happened to her, but we don't know what. Anything you want to talk about with that as setup before we start in tonight? Why do they keep throwing cliffhangers at us? Anything like that?
I mean, yeah, why is it that as soon as Spice is about to have like a really touching moment with one of these guys, she's forcibly logged one way or another?
About chapter 7, it might not be the most intensive TPL related chapter, but it's one that has a lot to do with the real world. And we spent, when it comes to ratios of effort spent to story or lore written, we've spent a lot of time talking about the real world that you all haven't even seen in any of the stories yet. Like, I remember one time we were calculating how much food would you need to sustain a population of let's just call it 900 million. And we did the calculations.
Yes, lots of Bailey's nutrient paste.
That's an interesting point that hasn't come up before. So the writer's room is actually doing a lot more than just the lore chapters we're seeing. They're working out some world dynamics that I'm assuming you're storing somewhere for later use.
Oh, all credit for that goes to Brianna, really. I mean, I know she's putting together a lot of the conversations that we end up having in the writer's room so that it's useful going forward. So that's where the kudos belong.
Yeah, if she wasn't around, I swear we would lose 75 to 95% of everything we talk about.
But it is, those discussions are happening about things outside of what we're seeing in the chapters. So like setting up what time is in TPL.
Yes, like we talked about time long before it was introduced, and we still talk about time sometime now.
And it seems like too, we'll get into this chapter, but like there's different aspects of time in the story where it's like different maybe in the compound life versus in TPL. And it's not necessarily that it's so different that they're, not counting things in blocks. But anyway, I look forward to getting into this chapter.
Okay. And anything else about the ending before we start up?
Okay. I think, just everybody is approaching this, situation as like what's happening for the greater population, both drifters and brokers. But in the last chapter towards the end and like getting into this chapter, we're also looking at like how these that brokers being AI and how that's impacting each individual that's touched by this.
Yeah, excellent point. It's not just what you're seeing. It's all TPL, all drifters, and frankly us as we're reacting to it ourselves. Okay, I'm going to start this up so that we can get to some real conversations. Thank you for the setup. Merk, could you start the first part of the chapter?
CyberBrokers, how a paradigm shift became the paradigm lost. Project Paradigm, Chapter 7, Fail-Safe Alpha. No. Spice struggled to pull the thought together in the infinite and profound void. No. I'm breathing. I can still hear echoes of sounds. I'm still here. I'm not nowhere. I feel cold and wet, and I see sunspots. Spice yanked off the headgear. Sweat drenched her hair and tech vest, and it was cold. As cold as the compound ever got, anyway. The familiar smell of ammonia and steel, the harsh-lit greyness of her coffin, the claustrophobia. It seeped into her senses in slow waves, like her mind was reloading, bite by bite. She rubbed her eyes. I got kicked. Ticks ago, she'd been in a shadowy doorway pressed up against a cute guy as the city burned around them. Blocks ago, she'd been cutting down the highway at ridiculous speeds atop a snarling engine. Now, she was back in the tiny, suffocating coffin that was her room. She shook her head and pushed the thought away. She'd read that lingering too long on the transition could turn the opaque splices joining the various realities into neuroses. Not interested in adding to the ones I already have. Instead, she focused on her surroundings, starting with the status of her rig. The link light wasn't green. Hell, it wasn't even red. Sound assaulted her ears. At first, she'd assumed they were latent TPL echoes, but after a moment, it became clear the compound sirens were screaming amid shouts and running footsteps beyond her door. What was happening out there? Still disoriented, Spice fumbled with the latches of her tech vest, hastily stripping it off. She pulled on a hoodie and opened her door. The cacophony of noises spiked, adding to her concern, and mixed with the confusion of getting kicked to create an anxiety-ridden cocktail. Life in the compound was, traditionally, monotonous. The paradigm might be plunged into chaos, but out here, an item being removed from the menu was enough to traumatize IRL denizens. She went to her door and yanked it open. Half the compound's 300 occupants seemed to be running through the tunnel outside. Some barked questions, some panicked, while others shuffled about with the dazed look of someone forcibly unplugged. But all of them were dressed in haphazard combinations of duty clothes. Spice watched a woman trying to keep a group of the compound's few children in an orderly line. You were just in the paradigm too, right? A familiar voice asked from behind her. She turned as Sybil approached. The thick layers she normally wore when cleaning solar drives gathered awkwardly around her waist as she tied her sweaty hair back into a ponytail. How can they kick us like that? Don't they realize killing rigs that fast can mess up your mind? It's like they've learned nothing. Spice blinked and shook her head. What happened? Sybil spun Spice around, pushing her back into her coffin, and closed the door behind them. Get dressed. We're going outside. Still too bewildered to argue, Spice pulled out her snow clothes and did as the other woman instructed. Fail-safe alpha. Sybil leaned against the door. The highest state of alarm. You don't remember the drill we did for it about 6 or maybe 7 years ago. Spice gestured towards the door. This isn't a drill. Oh, I know. Life support is the only system online, and that's been dropped to half capacity. Spice stopped with one arm in her parka. That didn't make any sense. Why? She sat down and tugged on a boot. Sybil shrugged. From what I can tell, nobody knows yet. System seemed fine earlier, no drones on radar, probably a false alarm, but everyone's supposed to head to their stations and make sure. That means you and I are heading out there to clear the collectors. She nodded at the open door as Spice finished tying her second boot. A thought struck her, and Spice stopped at the door. We haven't had an actual fail-safe alpha in over 80 years. Sybil laid her hand on top of Spice's head and nudged her forward into the rushing stream of people before following into the crowd. Spice hurried along ahead of her. Don't you think that's weird? 80 years, and now we're having one, and no one knows why? Maybe getting kicked like that fried your brain a little. Sybil glanced at Spice from the corner of her eye. I'm serious, she grabbed Sybil's arm. The protests, the clashes, half the city burning down, and suddenly we all get kicked? Sybil pulled out of her grasp. Who spends their rig time in the cities anymore? If you want to stare at granite and steel, just look around you. Spice opened her mouth to protest, but the look on Sybil's face said she wasn't in the mood to be convinced. Fine. They made their way to the compound exit in silence, but the gears in her head churned, trying to fit the pieces together. What was she missing? Chaos at the exit soon loomed. All the patrol teams had amassed into a disorganized mob as they grabbed supplies from the storage cabinets before heading out. Sybil walked up to the foreman. We're the collector cleaners. The big guy, clipboard in hand, glanced at them. Only 2 of you? There were 3, but He died out there. Come to think of it, why are there supposed to be only 3 people on the cleaner team? It's a tough job. Spice tried not to stare at Sybil as she unloaded on this poor man. Their job was one of the easiest in the compound. She was sure Ricardo had just gotten drunk and wandered off the edge of a glacier. Besides, that had been 2 years ago. Given the danger, we need more than a week or 2 break between shifts. With over 300 people in the compound, you can't even give us a team of... He finally cut her off. Above my pay grade, ladies. Take it up with administration. The foreman cleared his throat and glanced at the crowd forming behind the 2 women. For now, why don't you just grab a weapon and your marking poles and get out of here? Whatever. Sybil sighed and obliged. Spice did the same. They slung rifles over their shoulders, pocketed their devices, and then stepped outside. He didn't log us out, Spice noted. Why had Sybil distracted him? That was as far as she followed the thought, as the brutal, unrelenting cold engulfed her. The wind howled and bit like a vicious animal with 1,000 tiny teeth. Each lurching step was a full-bodied fight against the deep snow and angry gales. She'd taken point with Sybil behind her, taking full advantage of following in her tracks. Spice's goggles slipped and a chill cut across her cheek, pulling wind-laced tears like an icicle. She paused long enough to wipe it away with the back of her glove, adjusted her goggles, and pushed on. Another small bit of progress, another marker stabbed into the snowpack. All the while, she sorted through the whirlwind of thoughts racing in her head. She couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a false alarm. Something real was happening, something wrong. The thought held on, as insistent and difficult as the cold currently bearing down on her. She turned around, and Sybil almost collided with her. When her colleague caught her balance again, Spice raised her voice over the howl of the wind. I have to go. Sybil shook her head. What? Where? Postbox. Spice pointed in the opposite direction of the solar drives. Sybil stepped close enough to be heard above the wind and grabbed the other woman's shoulders. Don't get snow crazy on me, Spice. I know it's jarring to get kicked that hard and then come out here, but... Spice pushed Sybil's hands off. Not snow crazy. There's a post over there. POST, post, stood for Paradigm Offline Signal Transmitter. It was a small lunchbox-sized thing, plastic case, brushed metal panel inside. It was a hard-line comms link into TPL. In theory. I have to send a message to the Paradigm. It's the only way. No, you don't know what you're talking about, Sybil shook her head. Nobody's seen the post in 80 years. Not since the storm. A few months ago, I got pushed off course a little. Somewhere in that direction. Spice gestured again. I saw something in the snow. I'm sure of it. A bunker. An outpost. I don't know, but it might be there. She pulled out her small antique radar and aimed it. Triangulate. But what about me? Sybil jabbed a mitt into Spice's back. I can't go to the solar drives alone. What if this is a bandit attack or something worse? How can I explain this without sounding crazier? She shook her head and laid one mitt on Sybil's shoulders. It isn't. Trust me. You'll be fine. Cover for me when you get back. Sybil looked around as if something or someone might pop up out of the snow to support her before giving up and turning back. You owe me. Spice dropped her hand to her side and smiled beneath her mask. I'll take your next shift, I promise. The next 2, Sybil glared at her. She winced before nodding. Fine, 2. Be safe. You too. Spice turned away, and Sybil walked past her towards the solar collectors. She began the calibrations on her radar and shuffled out into the infinite expanse of white snowscape.
Okay. Well, Spice is okay. Somehow, Spice remembers things from 80 years ago, which is a little surprising. We get to meet an actual other drifter and see people that are around Spice all the time, and we have a failsafe alpha and a post box. Mags, can you comment on what those are?
Sure. Yeah, so, in this part of the story, we're doing a lot of brainstorming about what is compound life like, what's the organization, what are people who just got kicked out of TPL, how are they gonna react? But where it comes to fail-safe alpha, it's like there's got to be a safety mechanism where it comes to the compound of a bunch of people that are plugged in for 8 hours a day into the paradigm where, if a fire starts or, a tribal altercation comes up with a drone strike is going to happen, there's got to be a way to get people out of TPL so that they can get to a relative safe level within the compound or handle whatever emergency might be taking place. And so that's what the fail-safe alpha is all about.
So,
And then I guess as far as the post goes, if you think about what's going on at that point in humanity, they're living in these frozen in compounds, presumably pretty far from one another. But where are they going to get more supplies for different things that might be needed within the compound? And a lot of that's got to be taking place in the paradigm. So if they have an emergency situation and it goes on for a little bit of time, they've got to have a way to communicate with the paradigm.
so there was an interesting comment in there about, who wants to spend time here in real life when you can be in the TPL outside of a city and enjoying something that doesn't look like where we're living. Could you talk about that part at all?
Me? Yeah, I mean, you've got a very miserable experience of this Arctic situation where people are living underground to survive, and they are living in these stone and metal compounds that have very small rooms for the living quarters. They're not collecting things from one another or from the world around them, and so they don't really need space to collect things. But in the TPL, on the other hand, they have the ability to go out and create an experience, um, more than what real life is giving them at this point.
Nick, can you talk about the 80 years reference? Because that kind of, I remember when we were talking about that as a community, that was kind of like a, hey, wait a second, what spices age if she's talking about something 80 years ago?
Okay, I can actually touch on that a little bit. The way I've always taken it is she has heard that the last time a drill happened was X amount of years ago rather than something she remembers from even when she was a child. Because while she's not, she's not like 18, she's also not like 100. And in my experience, when you have events like that, where it's so, when you have drills every 80 years, like it becomes an event, something people talk about, something people remember. And I also imagine she had to go through some sort of training in order to do whatever job, in order to do her collector job. And I imagine they would have talked about stories of what happened the last time they had a drill. So that's where I think that tidbit of knowledge comes from.
And we talked about this a lot, Requiem, and in the writer's room about, what is it like to go through these rote drills every so often that you have to do. And, when you're doing that, they have to ask, somebody's got to ask, well, why are we doing this fail-safe alpha drill? Like, what is this all about? And, what's it for?
Nail on the head.
6 years, it seems like.
Yeah, it brought up, I think, a lot of conversation about what drifter life was like, because we haven't seen much of it up until now. And to your point, how often do drifters actually talk to each other? I mean, when was the last time every drifter in that compound actually got together in the same place? Is it the only time is when they have drills like this? I mean, it doesn't seem like they interact a lot.
So I can actually speak to the drill situation with some personal experience. I used to work on cargo vessels. And the only time that you could consistently get the entire crew together was during drills. And I want you to imagine a ship is much smaller than an entire compound. And it's mainly because everyone is on different work shifts. Like if you're in the deck department, there are 3 people on watch. There's 3 watches. So one guy will work from midnight to 4, and then he'll work from noon to 4 in the afternoon. And you're not going to see him because he eats lunch early or she eats on lunch early. And for all intents and purposes, they might not exist to you until a drill happens.
So yeah, so Spice and Sybil are, kind of passing each other in the hallway, maybe at best, but they're not actually seeing each other when they're taking their shifts in the solar fields.
Nail on the head. And they also work alternating shifts, so they have even less incentive to see each other.
Okay, one burning question I do want to ask before we move on. Was there any chance that Spice was not going to be okay at the beginning of this chapter?
Perhaps.
Blood oath, blood oath.
I'm not sure how to interpret that, but I'll move forward. Okay, let's continue on because we want to get to the last part and then bring community people up. Merk, could you play the second part of this chapter?
Hello, unironic Ken. Hello, Zinc. They growled the words from a distance, but in the still space of the empty prohibition-style basement bar, the only other sound was the squeaking of the bartender polishing glassware as a ballad spilled from the tired jukebox at the back of the room. Ken approached the booth where Zinc sat, watching the door, and slid across the opposite faded leather bench. Zinc downed the remainder of his neon blue drink and waved the empty glass at the bartender. Without taking his eyes off the other man, unironic Ken held up 2 fingers. After a long pause, Zinc spoke first, an undercurrent of tension to the words. I'm not looking for a fight. Ken grunted in disbelief. Who said anything about a fight? Zinc rolled the bottom of his glass in a tight circle on the table. I don't know. Maybe the same guy who didn't say anything about leading a charge into the city samurai either. We'll charge them again and again until people like you finally grok it. 2 drinks slammed on the table between them. The brutish bartender stood over them a moment, eyeing both of them, wary and annoyed. They nodded, and he grumbled as he turned away. Zinc used the moment to breathe deep and force down his nerves with a clenched fist on the table. Look, I pinged you to tell you that Spice was kicked. She was kicked while she was with you? Seriously, stop. She said she'd pinged you a bunch of times. You were probably too busy sticking it to the man. He ran a hand through his hair. It wasn't a normal kind of kick, though. It was sudden. It was severe. I'm worried. Unironic Ken opened his mouth, then closed it. Exhaling, he took a long, slow sip of his drink. She messaged me. Zinc lifted his eyebrow, shaking his head. He muttered, That's what I just said. No. Ken lay his forearm, wrapped in a bracer, on the table between them. After she got kicked from outside TPL. Zinc leaned over and tilted his head to look at the message on the bracer. Compound, kicked, failsafe, alpha, suspicious, timing, help me. He glared at the message for a whole block, like it was written in a foreign language. How do you know that's her? Unironic Ken shrugged. I had a feeling and checked the signature. Now, with you telling me she was kicked, I'm pretty sure it's her. Zinc stared at the message again. Seems like she had a kind of word or character limit on the message. Right. And the fact she asked us for help must mean her compound is compromised. I looked up what a failsafe alpha is. It's IRL knowledge, so I couldn't find much, but some drifters mentioned on the boards how it's a high state of alarm which causes all superfluous power draws like TPL rigs to get cut. Zinc sighed and leaned back, sipping his drink and staring into space. Ken's bracer pinged, his arms still on the table. Who's that? Ken frowned at his bracer. I don't know. It's an audio message. Encrypted. He set it to play, and a crackling, morphed voice like a bundle of dying electronics emerged.
I can help you. Meet me at the ethereal node now.
The message repeated. After it played a second time, Zinc slammed back his drink and stood up. Ken cocked his head to the side. Where are you going? Where do you think? Ken tapped his bracer. We don't know anything about this message, much less who sent it. Could be a trap. Zinc shrugged. It's the only lead we have, Ken. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? Getting demezed? He rapped his knuckles on the table for luck. You don't have to come along. He nodded to the bartender and started towards the door. Ken watched the bartender finish swirling his rag inside a different glass before swallowing the last of his own drink, then followed Zinc out of the bar. The ethereal node existed only 15 blocks away, but it felt longer today. Each of them followed the route their own way. Unironic Ken stuck to the side of the streets, skulking through the shadows, tensing up whenever a vehicle sped past or he heard a noise nearby. Zinc walked casually, like he was on the way to his own apartment, his face a slightly amused mask as he watched the other man. Unlike a lot of clubs in the city, the ethereal node bustled with light and noise, still open for business. For many, the large neon-lit building loomed familiar, the place with the best music, the most diverse people, and the most exciting atmosphere. To others, it was a second home, a place to work, or even a place to be avoided. The ethereal node was where contacts were made, deals negotiated, and plans assembled. If you wanted to buy a chem, a killer, or even a good time, and you didn't know where else to look, you came here. The Merkle Tree might be where power resided, but the ethereal node was where it was transferred, which meant the ethereal node didn't need security. Even with the city in chaos, an unspoken rule existed that nobody hit the place. Its clientele hit back hard. Ken entered the club first, calling out greetings as he passed through the crowd hanging out at the edges of the main crowd. Zinc paused for a moment to scan the place, searching for people who might be looking for them. The club was jumping, as always. Neon lights cutting beautiful shapes from the bodies on the dance floor. The music was so rhythmic it cleared the mind, so loud it hummed through the soul. A dreamer in the corner opened viewports into faraway paradises for a thrumming audience. "Come over here," Ken called out to Zinc before dismissing the waitress he caught in conversation. Zinc slid sideways through the busy crowd and followed him to an empty booth in one of the ethereal node's many corners. "Why are you sitting down?" Zinc asked. "We should find the contact." Unironic Ken glared at him. "Relax, junk man." Ken gestured for Zinc to sit down. "The waitress told me someone left a message for us to meet squeakers in this booth." "A message? From who?" Zinc slid into the bench seat, tapping his fingers on the table. "She says she didn't see anyone. She just found the note on this table." "Great," Zinc frowned. "We're probably dealing with one of those puzzle masters." After a pause, he turned to Ken. "Also, don't call me junk man." "Why not? That's your job, isn't it? Clean up crew." "Right. Clean up crew, not junk man." Ken laughed. "No need to get touchy, friend." "I'm not getting touchy. You sound like the very definition of touchy right now. At least I don't have a complex about being a..." Zinc began, then stopped himself and looked out across the crowd. Forget it." "No. Go on." Ken crossed his arms, all humor gone. "I said forget it." "A leftover. That's what you were going to say, wasn't it?" Zinc focused back on unironic Ken's glare. "Look." Zinc kept his tone even and passive. "I don't have any problem with it. I don't think anyone's worth more or less than anyone else. But I know some of you get all caught up in them not having a proper talent thing." "A proper talent? What, like scrubbing pixels and changing textures in backwater zones?" "See what I'm saying? It's a complex." "It's not a complex, junk man." "Who's touchy now? You got everyone burning down Era Novum just because..." Both of them stopped, immediately distracted by the rat, which had jumped on their table. They stared at it in confused surprise as it nibbled and stared back, black eyes glistening in the shifting pink lights of the dance floor. "Ethereal node allows pets now," Zinc muttered. A dramatic break in the music isolated the mouse's high-pitched chatter. "Squeakers," Ken laughed triumphantly, pointing. "This is who we're supposed to meet." "Must be." Zinc shook his head and groaned. "You know what?" He shifted in his seat. "Thanks for the sparkling conversation, but I'm out of here." He paused, however, catching sight of a rolled-up document attached to the rat's leg. He settled back in his seat and reached out, pulling at it cautiously, ready for the rat to bite. It didn't, and eventually he managed to take the tiny slip of paper out. "What is it?" Ken asked. "A note." Zinc unfolded it. "Say Sha Dao to your buddy." Unironic Ken repeated the words slowly to himself. "Say Sha Dao to your buddy? Spice?" Zinc shrugged. "Is that what it means by your buddy? How would we? She's kicked. The person who sent us here knows that." Ken studied Zinc's face for a moment, then shook his head. "No, you're not even a buddy." He looked around the club, through the dancers and the drinkers, and then his face brightened. The ad buddy. He bounced out of his seat. Zinc glared at the note skeptically. Come on. With a sigh, Zinc got up and they pushed their way through the dance floor to the other side of the club, where an ad buddy was looking for drinkers to entertain. Seeing their interest, it spun around to face them with all 5 of its screens displaying a happy, welcoming face. You were right, Ken. Zinc stopped in front of it. This is feeling like some trap or some script kitty making fools of us. I don't normally do this, but I want to help, the ad buddy said. You seem like a nice person, and I want... Shut up, Ken told it, snatching the paper note from Zinc's hand. We're here now, and it was your idea to come in the first place. What was that password again? Say shadow to your buddy. Ken read out aloud. It's got to be the ad buddy. Do you even know what shadow is? Zinc shot glances around the club suspiciously. They run the jump stations. What's a transport company got to do with any of this? Be quiet. Ken didn't look up, concentrating on his bracer. I'm connecting to the buddy. Suddenly, the ad buddy's face blinked out along with the rest of its screens. Reams of code cascading in their place. Ken's bracer rang out with the tones for receiving multiple points of information. What did you get? Zinc leaned over his shoulder. 10% off your next wild goose chase. Ken responded by spinning around and dashing for the rear exit of the ethereal node, shoving multiple patrons, his eyes fixed upon his bracer. He slammed through the door into the dark alley behind the club and continued quickly past a blinking, boosted drifter. Hey! Zinc called as he emerged from the door, catching up with Ken. What does it say? We've got 100 blocks. 100 blocks for what? To get Spice back into TPL. Ken slowed a little to show Zinc the info on his bracer. It says that the fail-safe alpha of her compound is being tripped from a device in a heavily guarded building in the industrial district. The building's owned by a shell company, apparently for Shardao. You still think they're just a transport company? Anyway, the defense systems for the device are down for the next 100 blocks, so if we can get to it in time... Zinc snorted, but Ken was moving too fast to notice. So you're just going to run into this heavily guarded building based on intel from a rat and an ad buddy? What's the worst that can happen? Ken paused to show Zinc his sarcastic smile. Getting demezed?
So that was quite uncomfortable. Ken and Zinc trying to interact, and all of a sudden we have a rat on the table. Tell us more, Mags and Nick.
I think it's really interesting, to be honest, that these two guys are talking more about their talents as opposed to, what it means to them to be AI. I mean, they can't even connect on that level right now, and they're so wrapped up in, proving their own worth, I guess, to one another and why they might be better for Spice in one way or another, that they're focused on that. Yeah, it was uncomfortable.
That's one of the things I enjoyed about this chapter is it showed that they're not so much putting their they have to do the same goal, but they're not friends. They don't even like each other.
And this is where Team Ken versus Team Zinc, I think, really took off, because I'll be honest, as a leftover, Zinc tweaked me by going down that path. And I understand he didn't mean it, but the point was it came out. So can you forgive him for it? And to be fair, Ken came right back with Junk Boy. So, same thing. Can you talk about Ken versus Zinc in the writer's room at all?
We can touch on it. It's not a clear divide in the writer's room, so I don't want you thinking that we've been, how do I say this, poisoning the well to one side or another. I want to say the writer's room is fairly equally split, and the Ken-Zinc divide really didn't start getting vitriol until this chapter, and it was really expounded upon in the next chapter, I would say.
We kind of got to remember timing here. So an in-real event happened in the middle of this chapter at NFT NYC, right?
Yes. Yeah, and a lot of us in the writers' room, we were working on certain things for the NYC event, trying to get those things ready as this, chapter was being finalized too. And um, so, yeah, the tension between Ken and Zinc and focusing more on um, what they do as opposed to what they are, uh, it's an interesting situation. But we can all see the merits in both of them, I think, in the writer's room. That's the way I see it.
Does it surprise the writers' room that the holders seem more interested in Ken versus Zinc versus brokers or AI? I mean, the storyline.
On my end, not really. Because when you look at the brokers as being an AI thing, that is a high level thing. Like on the big strokes of the world, yes, it matters more than anything else. But it's also not something most people wrap their head around. It's kind of like how in real life, like there could be a war going on somewhere, but we're still busy focusing on other things.
Also, too, I don't think that these two really fully can grasp the fact that their drifter friend, I mean, they're clearly worried about Spice, but like the bigger thing is that there's this organization that, you know, they don't really know much about that clearly has something to do with why their drifter friend is not in TPL. And now they only have so much time, 100 blocks, to be able to get her back into TPL.
That's a very good point. Really, no one has had time to sit down and think about all the implications that have happened now that they know they're AI. Ken and Zinc in particularly have even had less time.
Yeah, that's a good point. They almost just like went from knowledge to immediate protest and didn't stop to like ponder what it really meant.
Somebody laid an elephant in front of them. Now they're trying to eat it one bite at a time, like without choking.
That's an analogy and a half. Thank you. Simple 100 blocks. What amount of time is that?
I would need to go find the chart. Give me a sec.
We have it broken down in charts. Yeah, because time is a little different. Like we were talking about earlier this evening, that the TPL time being blocks and things like that. And then you've got this discussion about it's been 80 years since the last failsafe alpha was triggered. And it's been 80 years also since that post box was needing to be found. And I can't imagine that that's coincidence. But, 6 years since the last drill on the failsafe alpha. But like in TPL, you've got the blocks and the circuits and the cycles and stuff. So it's just a little bit different.
I remember somewhere that like 10,000 blocks was a week.
Yes.
1,000 blocks is a day, 10K blocks is a week. You're nail on the head.
So that makes 100 blocks an hour?
Correct.
Okay.
Wait, no. There's 1,000 blocks in a day. So.
Okay, so a little less than an hour.
Yeah.
Okay, so that doesn't give them much time. Sorry. I got stuck on the mechanics part. So what else did you each find, intriguing in this particular chapter about, either the dynamic between Ken and Zinc, or, all of a sudden we find Spices out of the TPL and who did it? What was like a favorite part that you connected with?
I found the chart real quick. A block is it's their version of a minute.
I mean, for the writer's room, I can't speak for everybody, but for myself, I had a lot of fun discussing the semantics of like why a failsafe alpha was necessary, and having also to having this like in real life event going on at the same time that this chapter was coming out, and the quest was being done, and uh, having Spice out of TPL at that time too. It all aligned so nicely. I wish I could have been a little bit more involved with this chapter, but there was other things getting ready for the NYC event that we were working on too. So I think, yeah, for me, I don't know. I liked having Sybil and Spice interacting and what her real life interactions might be like with other drifters in the compound, discussing that.
Yeah, this chapter I really liked. We did get that, let's call it a juxtaposition between the TPL and the real world. And we did get to see more of Spice's quote-unquote real life, without bringing up the debate about what is real at this point. But I will also say we spent a lot of time talking about this chapter because we had to figure out a way to get the TPL to talk to the real world, and then we had to figure out what the real world was going to be like, and then we had to figure out how the TPL is going to be. It was very involved, and you add NYC New York, as she was talking about on top of that. It got pretty hectic at times.
Were either of you at NFT NYC?
No, but I loved seeing the keys and seeing all the people in their costumes. I loved the sheeple costume. It was my favorite.
I don't go to New York unless it's at gunpoint.
That's odd. I thought you only experienced gunpoint in New York City, but
I'm Florida. Everything's at gunpoint.
we talked about this too, and I just want to jump in the quest, then we'll get back to the lore. But as someone who was in New York City, I missed out so much on this quest and kind of what happened, because we were all mobile, and a bunch of different people got to get involved with the quest, and the reactions and everything in the channels, and I thought it was an amazing experience for those people because it was different, than the previous quest and interactions, and there was a vote, right?
I think that happened towards the end, right after the chapter.
Yeah, I want to say that if it wasn't at the end of the chapter, it was damn near the tail end.
Okay, so the vote occurred between this chapter and the next chapter.
Also, I can say this without violating any writer's room blood pacts. The votes are real. Like, they have consequences. I can say that much.
Okay, so back to the NFT NYC thing. So did you notice as this was going on the difference in chat because there were so many people that were kind of offline?
I think it was a great way to incorporate those of us that couldn't attend, because we did have this ethereal node visit that we got to do, and reading the lore and seeing the photos, and it was just a really good way to connect us with those folks that were able to be there in person.
Now, I did notice it seemed that everyone who was on Team Ken was at NYC New York, or at least the that.
Well, based upon the vote, at least. But yeah, I think it's kind of where I was trying to lead to is, while there was an event at NFT NYC, there was something almost just as special going on outside with the community in, the Discord and, what you were experiencing. I don't know how to describe that, though, because I wasn't there. Do you understand what I'm asking, or am I just not making sense on this one?
No, you're making sense, but I think both the people in on the ground and the people on the Discord got to experience something that was, I'm going to just say special. I can't think of a better word right now. And each side fed on the other, because if y'all hadn't been doing your stuff in real life, we would never have gotten anything moving in the Discord.
Okay, sorry, back to the chapter. Dot, do you have a question?
I was going to come up to talk about the blocks, about the time blocks, but I also wanted to ask Nick if he doesn't go to NFT NYC, or he doesn't go to New York because he has to drive through the fictional area of Newark, New Jersey to get there.
Exactly. Like, I'm not driving to a fictional place just to get to New York.
I feel like that's an inside joke somehow.
I didn't know Newark was a real place.
Newark, the city?
Yes, I thought it was not a real place.
Okay.
Like literally, it was what, like 2-3 weeks ago. Didn't know it was a real place.
You thought it was a
That's
mispronunciation of New York.
I love you guys for calling him out on that.
It was so good.
So I think Nick, you have a free pass for a comeback in a later show. There is a question in chat. I'm not sure I understand it, so I'm just going to read it and see if you can answer. How many cycles can a broker go through in a given shift or given block? And this is from Anna/Ohas.
I think he's trying to ask, do brokers have to sleep? I might be wrong, but I think that's what he's trying to ask. And from what I understand of the lore, brokers do not have to sleep.
Correct. They don't have to sleep. I think the cycles are kind of like a year-ish. In the discussions that we were having, looking at what takes place in an annual way, without having seasons outside when you're snowed into your living space. What happens? How do you count that?
Oh, interesting. Okay. You know what? That would be kind of like a good article on for the newsletter. Not the newsletter, the Era Novum Ledger. You know, an article on where these terms came from and why. I'm calling Anna up because I think his question may have been different. Ohas, go ahead.
Ask a follow-on question. So, how many, what do you call, 10,000 blocks make a cycle?
It would be about 400,000, wouldn't it? If you're dealing with quarters, if the cycle is broken up in quarters, then yeah, it'd be about 400.
I have the chart in front of us. Actually, the chart you made. A cycle is 4K blocks. A quarter or season is 10K blocks. A circuit is 40 to 50K blocks. And then week K block, all that other jazz.
I think there's a zero missing, but yes.
Sorry, could you repeat that, or is it possible for us to get a copy of it, either via newsletter or through the Era Novum Ledger?
I like that idea. Maybe the Broadcasting Corp could also produce a chart or something like that.
Okay, because I think that keeps tripping us in the quest when we hear cycles and blocks, especially when we have brokers around the world trying to plug in to solve the quest.
I think that's fair.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Does the TPL have time zones?
We haven't decided, but time zones suck.
Okay, so back. Let's go back to the story. Who's this mysterious person that seems to now be leading Ken and Zinc on a mission?
I mean, we don't really even know that. Plus Blood Oath.
I think they're called the Moderator, something like that.
Okay, and we don't know anything about them. Do we know anything? Well, and we still don't even know.
They're kind of snippy. We know that.
Yeah. That's from today. We don't even know anything about who kicked or created the failsafe alpha, right? We just know it happened.
We don't know who triggered it. I assume each compound develops their own safety protocols, but we don't know who triggered it.
Okay.
But they're heading towards a machine at the end of this chapter, I believe. Unless I'm getting ahead of myself.
You mean the ad buddy is they have 100 blocks to get somewhere to
Yes.
get her back in?
Correct. And they figure out that, well, I'm going to shut up because in case it's in chapter 8. Sometimes they roll together a little bit.
Got it. Yeah, I'm struggling with that one too, because there's a bunch of stuff that kind of really happened with this chapter, but we don't hear about it until chapter 8. Okay, so let me ask a different question then. what is Spice's other drifter's name? I just forgot.
Sybil?
Yes, so Sybil was trying to do something with the supervisor, and I didn't quite understand what was going on there. Can you provide any more detail?
I found that interesting too, because she helps Spice avoid getting a log of their exit from the compound, which actually ends up helping Spice be able to have the time to reach the post and get her message to Ken. But the motivating factor there is kind of like I don't know why that would be the case.
I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't notice it until going through this rereading. But yes, that was... It stood out to me, even today. And I'm not quite sure what to make of that. Maybe Sybil legitimately believes they need more labor, which is valid considering they used to have 3 people. But it raises questions that I don't have answers for.
And I was kind of going back and forth between is she being nice and trying to help her out, and this implies, some level of deeper relationship between the two of them, or was she setting up to off Spice? I couldn't figure out which.
Oh, I don't think she said to off Spice. I mean, you live in a compound with approximately 300 people. You're not like your survival is based on the cooperation of everybody in there to some degree. And ultimately, like at the end of the day, everybody just wants to get plugged back in and live their life in TPL.
Dot. Okay.
And also, if 2 of your coworkers disappear within 2 years of each other, somebody's going to start asking questions. Like, why does everyone on the solar collector team keep dying?
Well, and that's another good question. I mean, what happens if Spice couldn't have logged back into the TPL in 100 blocks? I guess I don't understand that part either.
And I guess we'll never know.
You got to give us a little something here. Okay. Dot, Ohas, any other questions you want to ask?
I'm good, thank you.
I have one. I want to know what Requiem's only cam name is.
Well, you see, you would need to talk to Venus or Requiem himself about that. I just run paperwork.
Got it. So you got a blood oath with them.
They gotta, but it's less a blood oath and more like I don't want to go back to living in this really crappy apartment in Noble because I'm really bad at playing the game that is the city of Noble.
Team Ken, Team Zinc?
I'm going to remain neutral on that one and just say thank you so much, Carl. I think that these are wonderful spaces. You guys do a great job, Merk. Requiem, is awesome to be on here with you. And Dot, thanks for coming up.
Yes, absolutely. And again, thank both of you because you have all the great stories. I'm just trying to figure out how to ask the right questions. Love having people from the writers' room sharing more about what kind of goes beyond the scenes, and then little details of how things came about sometimes are amazing. So thank both of you for that. Thank Merk, as always, for making this all happen technology-wise, and Dot and Ohas for coming up and asking questions. Another great one. Thank you all, and everyone, let's say good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Newark isn't real.